Okay, hey guys, I'm Josiah Rawlings, and this is old Jimmy Carlson, and together we're here to present to you some information that we felt was most interesting from the book How to Live with Maps. I think an alternative name for this book could easily have been 1 Billion Things You Never Knew About Maps. It was tough to pare down all the information in the book, but we did our best to do it, and hopefully we can present to you something that's not a complete review, but a little bit of a review, especially for us military folks. And without further ado, let's get things kicked off with Jimmy.
Okay, the biggest takeaway from this book is that not only is it easy to lie with maps, but it's essential because in order to portray meaningful relationships for a complex three-dimensional world on a flat 2D piece of paper, a map must therefore distort reality. So this leads to the cartographic paradox, which is to present a useful and truthful picture. An accurate map must tell little white lies. But here comes the biggest issue, because as map users, as long as we're willing to tolerate little white lies in our maps, it's therefore easy for cartographers to tell more serious lies with their maps. So therefore, always have a little bit of skepticism when it comes to map use.
Okay, so there's three basic attributes to any map. The first of that is a scale. You want to know what scale you're working at. So just basically the scale resides in the bottom left-hand corner of every map, or bottom of any map, and it'll probably say something like scale on it. Scales look different. They present to you different information based on the scale. I've got a scale here that doesn't have any depictions. There's three different ones of Mount Rainier here. You can see in the top left-hand corner, you got pretty good detail there. You've got some lines you can tell. There's some elevation issues. And here you can see, a little different detail, and then a larger version here. Scales come in three different flavors. Here's examples of ratio scales. You can see in the bottom there how those three may differ. And this is an example of a graphical scale. And then coming through, a verbal scale is really just plain English. In the bottom, it'll tell you that 1 inch equals 1 mile. So watch out for the scales, guys. Projections would be thing 2 to look out for on the map. There are different kinds of projections, and those of us in the military, and really whoever drives a car down the road and uses Google Maps, is probably most familiar with the Mercator projection. We went through these fairly extensively early on in the class, so I won't hit it too hard. The best thing to know is that the Mercator projection is really good for navigation. That's why we use them in the military for navigation. You can measure straight line distance or straight line from one place to another on the map and grab yourself a quick bearing that way and navigate off of it. Symbology would be the third thing we're looking at. You got to be careful with symbology though, because as you can see here, we've got a bad depiction of symbology. While we do have a few things listed in the map key here that depict what different symbols mean on the map, we have an incomplete key. Therefore, if you didn't really already know what this little picnic table meant, you could infer something incorrectly and not really understand what's happening with your map. So watch out for that little pitfall. Generally when I think of symbology, I go straight to the map key and I think, hey, there's a little symbol drawn on there. But really, symbology encompasses anything the cartographer decides to put on the map. So from the power lines here depicted on this small little map to these contour lines that depict elevation changes, those are all considered symbology. The map in the bottom left hand is obviously a street map. Okay, guess what it highlights? Streets. So the cartographer is looking to highlight those streets, and those are the symbols that he's most focused on, he or she's most focused on in this case. This is an example of your crazy cartoony theme park map. What I wanted to show you guys here is that even if you're in another land and you don't speak the language, you could still probably get around using this map pretty easily. So it's important to have clear symbology, even if it's giant cartoony. It's still useful to you. I don't think I've ever been lost in Disneyland. Maybe you have, but I haven't, because of the giant loppy cartoony symbology that we've got there. This here is a depiction of, harvest yields in the United States, and an example that Jimmy's going to get in here a little bit more in depth later with colors. But just as you can say, different colors on maps will pop in different ways, and I would probably be the gray tone color guy because I'm not good interior designer, matching colors to things. So you get what you get. Colors mean something, and recognize that. We'll let Jim get into it later. Different kinds of symbology can represent things in different ways. In this case, they're representing crop yield for the United States. So that, the darker the color, the higher the yield, the bigger the circle, the more the acres. Really simple stuff. And this guy got risky and used orange as a color. Would have again been the shades of gray guy.
So getting into what Joe talked about with scale. Scale can play into a big issue with proportionality on maps and how it can actually distort the information it's trying to represent. So in this case, this is a 1 to 100,000 scale map, and you have a roadway that is cutting through, running east to west. Now, typically with a map this scale, a map is about 1/50 of an inch wide. What that means then, using the scale, that roadway is then 167 feet wide based off the proportion of that this map is using. That being said, most roadways are only 40 feet. So in comparison, you have a 40-foot roadway is the typical road width compared to 167. What it's going to do is it's going to blur out other things to the left and right of said road, say like sidewalks, the yards of residential neighborhoods. Over here on this portion here on a map, this is a topographic map, 1 to 24,000 scale. Typically with these types of maps, of woodland areas smaller than 1 acre, they will not be represented on this map. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just that the cartographer is prioritizing larger areas of woodland area to represent. Therefore, just because there is a half an acre woodland area, it won't be represented on the map. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This map over here is from Rocky Mountain National Park, and this gets into the planimetric distance talked about in his book, where maps can skew information by compressing a three-dimensional land into a two-dimensional map, which then negates all sorts of elevation information. It's roughly a straight line from point A to point B, and it's not taking into account those dips and rises in elevation, and therefore your travel through this national park is probably going to be a lot longer than what you think it is, because it's not accounting for those distances associated with those dips and rises. Third part that I want to show on this map gets into the template effect, which is kind of what Joe was alluding to a little bit earlier with standardized symbology. Maps will often inaccurately group different features, just overgeneralizing the symbology in the map itself. So right here you have a bunch of shopping bags. They represent stores. You have no idea what kind of store it is. It could be a pharmacy. It could be a bookstore. No idea, but we just know that there's a store here, and the overgeneralization doesn't give us much useful information if we're trying to go shopping for a specific product.
Okay, guys, this is one of the more cool concepts that I learned in this book, and I'd love to pass on to you guys. So I'll spend a little bit extra time on this slide just telling you about intentional blunders and unintentional blunders of maps. This here, what I'm depicting are examples of both of them. In the bottom right, you have Agloe, New York. It's just this, podunk, it doesn't exist town, fake town in New York, that these guys in 1925, some map makers, cartographers by the name of Otto Lindbergh and Ernest Alpers. The name of the town is an anagram for their names, which doesn't really matter. The fact is that they were cartographers who didn't want their work copied, so they put this fake town on there that only they knew about, so that later on, if they saw a copy of a map and saw that this town existed on that map, they could take those guys to copyright court and sue them into oblivion. Sadly, 90 years after this town was created, which was in 1925, Google Maps removed it because they figured it wasn't a thing anymore, because in 1997, the United States court system stopped using this as precedent to get people on copyright law. They just said, hey, stop lying on maps. And people were like, okay. Which leads me to my next thing, unintentional blunders, which can really get you in trouble. So if you look in the top left there, this is kind of a funny example of an unintentional blunder. Newspaper puts a map up in their newspaper and they misspell Illinois. Oops, like no big deal, right? Who really cares about Illinois anyways? So misspell it all day long. You don't really care. Where it becomes an issue especially from a military's perspective, is where, you know, a fighter jet that's flying through the mountains of Italy hits a gondola line and all of a sudden people are dead. But that gondola line happens to not be depicted on any maps. Oops, unintentional blunder. Another example would be most recently, submarine hits an underwater mountain. That wasn't on a map. Oops, unintentional blunder. So those are two really key examples. I'll give you one more, though. Invasion of Granada. Some, you know, enterprising intelligence guy takes a grid reference graphic, plops it over what he thinks is a complete island of Granada. Some other enterprising intelligence guy does the same thing. Both products circulate out in the system. Air crews, people on the ground working off two different products, never a good idea. Result in friendly fire incidents in Granada, hospitals being hit, not good things. That's one of the reasons in the military, especially from my perspective here, when I get a guy checking in on the radio and he comes into my air stack, I confirm that he's working off the same products that I'm on. That way we at least confirm we're working with the same bad information, you know, and that's a better page of music to work off of than two different kinds of information, which is real bad miscommunication, hard to clear up on the radio, could end in civilian casualties, friendly casualties, or an incident that we just, you know, don't want to deal with it.
A less bleak concept is colors with maps. So colors in maps actually became more of an issue post 1980s with technology, because prior to the 1980s, most maps, because of the expense of printing in color, were not as prevalent. So this became kind of a bigger issue later on with modern technology. First thing I want to point out here is this picture. So these are two beach chairs sitting in front of a beach. Now, what happened? This is a Xerox copy of an initial photograph, and we know that in this picture that the ocean is most likely blue, the sand's probably white, the chairs are a certain color, but all we have is a simple black and white picture. This happens when you Xerox, say, a map where the hues, the colors themselves are different. However, the color value is the same. They will then show up as the same color in a black and white copy. Therefore, according to the author, you should never trust a map that has been photocopied or faxed to you. The second thing I want to point out is this map here. So about 5% of the male population is actually colorblind. So with this taken into account, most map makers will actually choose colors if they're trying to make a colorblind friendly map, more on the ability for a user who is colorblind to actually use it, vice the actual representation of the map it's providing. So typically, red, blue, or green and blue pairings are more favorable to someone who's colorblind. Therefore, map users will use those colors more than, say, red and green, where it can usually blend those colors to someone who's actually colorblind. Therefore, you don't have an accurate representation based off those colors of what you're looking at.
Okay, guys, maps that advertise. We've all seen them. We've all probably drawn the little thing on a napkin that's just putting real general things that we want to show people onto a small little map. Less cartography and more artistry is what this is. Artistry and creativity. Here on the left is an example of an engineering, like cartographer's view of what a rail system might look like. And on the right, you've got the helter-skelter Northern Railway artist depiction of what's going on. So the map on the right might be used for clients or something of that nature, potential clients. You show that to them on the board. You say, look how connected we are. It's a direct shot to Skelter from Helter. But then you look at the engineering map, which we don't show those guys, and you see that it's really more of a convoluted route, and maybe the competitor is actually a better choice. But we don't want to tell people that because we're trying to sell you something. More examples of advertising maps. You know, if you're in Florida, you're gun friendly, right? You know, or if you own Rudy's Plumbing here on the left, you're the only option for all these other townships that exist. I mean, if I live in Cheddar, I'm obviously going to Rudy's. It's a direct shot. But what am I missing? I'm missing a map scale to show me how far Rudy's actually is from me. Do I have any other plumbing supply stores between Cheddar and here on Old McAdam Road? I might have one right around the corner and not even know it. But since this is an advertising map, it's showing you what it wants to show you. It's obviously biased in that direction. Watch out. Karen's doing the same kind of stuff over here with her bowling camp. Karen's, you know, probably got to deal with all these guys on the map. If you don't see what you like here, go find a different source. It's like a doctor telling you something about your health you didn't like, so go get a second opinion.
In that same point of view, development maps are another tricky way that map makers can actually create a map to lie to you. Maps are essential to urban planning and are often the center point for negotiations between developers and planning boards. Developers typically have millions of dollars invested in a project. Therefore, they have a lot in their deep pockets to actually portray a more rosier picture than the actual development project is. So because they have deeper pockets than typically the planning boards, they're going to have much better maps to make decisions off of and then entice planning boards to make decisions more in their favor. Case in point is this one right here. It's for a commercial building with no trees, few trees, many trees. Typically, they're going to go with the graphic with many trees because it looks more environmentally friendly, and they can actually entice the planning board to go with their project because it looks more environmentally friendly, even though they could be completely mitigating other sorts of ecological issues in the area.
I got all the fun ones, guys. So political map, we've all seen this one. Yeah, don't care. But we know where we're going with this next train of thought here. Florida. I'm from Florida, so I'm going to check out the Florida court system. I want to know who owns me because there's different kind of political maps, right? These ones we're going to talk about here are kind of political maps that show symbols of power, authority, or national unity. Well, this is showing the power the Florida Supreme Court has over the rest of the state. And the rest of the pictures there are depicting what the lower courts have power over. More fun example is the Kashmir region, Afghanistan, near Afghanistan, China, Pakistan, kind of tri-border region up there. That's a well-known disputed area. These maps here are from government websites. They're the surveyed maps of the government website of that region. Let's check out what they think they own. Okay, India on the left. They just claim it all. I don't see any little notes on it or anything. I just see a whole border full of India owns this, asserting dominance over that area. Pakistan, well, they have a little disputed border region thing here that says India is illegally occupying this area, and then they're super non-committal on here. They're like, you don't want to step on China's toes with the Aksai Chin region, so they're like non-committal on their power, where India was like dominate. And then China, they recognize all the disputed little border lines here. They're being very diplomatic about it, but with Aksai Chin, they're like, India's got a claim on this little piece, but we're still gonna depict it on this map. So China's kind of being the diplomatic one. Pakistan's being real non-committal because they need China's foreign aid, and India is just, it's ours. So I respect that, India.
All right, getting more into defense maps. They can be used as intellectual weapons for political propaganda, and they can be fundamental in tactical weapons, as well as counterintelligence and covert diplomacy. This leads to the protection of certain cartographic information, and this was actually a favorite tactic by the Soviets during the Cold War because they would distort positions of villages, as well as just completely omit certain information on certain towns. They wanted military planners in the US and China to consider their maps untrustworthy, so they wouldn't use coordinates based off those maps for cruise missile guidance. So they intentionally made their maps erroneous for the sake of national defense. Now, getting more into that, we have a tourist map of Russia, specifically Moscow. This area is not really labeled, but if you go to a U.S. Foreign Service map, which our U.S. embassies provide to Foreign Service employees working at, say, the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, you can clearly see that this area is labeled the Kremlin. This is a very common Soviet tactic where they'll give locals maps that completely negate and omit important government offices throughout the city, whereas Foreign Service members using U.S. maps are actually more accurate in Russian Moscow than the ones produced by Russia themselves.
Okay, guys, faster, funnier. This slide here is depicting the same scale from one from the United States on the right-hand side and one from Sweden on the left-hand side, of Switzerland on the left-hand side. As you can see, there are different standards for different countries. So the United States has one standard of what symbology to put on the map. Europe might have another. Be aware of it. Just because you have the same scale map doesn't mean you're going to see the same information. Next.
All right, data maps are pretty interesting as well. So in this case here, what you can see, this is a data map of unemployment. Well, you saw a huge dramatic rise in unemployment in January 2020. Why on this data map? It doesn't really tell you why, but most likely you guys can deduce it already. It's due to the coronavirus. Most people stayed at home, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Therefore, unemployment skyrocketed in January of 2020. But this map makes no instance of COVID being a causal factor. Now, this can play into politics because a political party wants to then argue, hey, unemployment was really bad under X party. Well, they can use this map to illustrate that, and vice versa. And that's where data maps can be very tricky and be used as political propaganda for a certain party.
Okay, images, just straight up pictures from the sky. It's our last kind of work. We're intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance guys. Take a picture of the land, put whatever symbology you want over it. That's kind of the name of the game here with image maps. Super useful. This is a macro level GRG. I can send this out to the tactical audience, and we can all quickly talk each other onto something when we get onto a target. But y'all remember these pictures from 2003 Iraq. These things can be used to tell a story, right? And whatever little PowerPoint text I want to put or box I want to circle on here, I could put lies on here, intentional blunders, fake blunders. But I'm briefing off these things. I'm taking pictures and I'm saying, look, that's a really bad decontamination vehicle. Or look, that's a chemical facility. What makes that a chemical facility? From that picture. It's just me telling you that. There's no source data. Suspect, right? It could be very suspect. So look at these with a discriminating eye. Take them for what they are. Make sure you're getting some other information with this kind of image map. They are incredibly useful. Just make sure the right story is being told to you when you're looking at these things. Don't get lost in the sauce on these guys.
Prohibitive cartography is another way maps can lie as well. And they're basically creating areas that are prohibitive, saying, hey, you are not allowed in this area. Where this comes into play is following the UN Convention of the Law of Sea in 1982, where the creation of economic exclusion zones that extend 200 nautical miles off the coast of an international border. So this we're seeing play out very recently in the South China Sea, where all these different players are claiming different economic exclusion zones that overlap one another and causing them to fight and try and claim of certain islands within the South China Sea from competitors simply because it falls within this 200 nautical mile zone. Now, these maps you can see in the top right here, this is the economic exclusion zones that are being contested right now in the South China Sea. What they're also completely omitting are the international trade routes that flow through these same waters as well that are open for international trade. So it is omitting a huge piece of information in this small micro look at, hey, we're only looking at economic exclusion zones, but you also have a bunch of international right-of-ways through this water for trade. Another thing to look at too for prohibited maps is floodplains, which drive certain people to get flood insurance. A big misnomer is the 100-year flood. So 100-year flood, if you had it say last year, you're good for 99 years. Incorrect. 100-year floodplain means you only have a 1% chance of that region getting flooded per year. You're not protected for a 100-year span. It's just a percentage and creates a misconception and causes a lot of detrimental effects because, hey, I'm in the 100-year floodplain. I won't have one for another 100 years. I don't buy flood insurance. I get flooded next year based off that 1%, and now I'm out of luck.
Okay, guys, faster and even funnier. Maps like Waze, Google, things like that, based on what's called a WIGS 84 datum. Don't worry about the datum. There are different datums that exist out here. We use one. China uses another. That's what you need to be aware of. You ever find yourself in China using a mapping system, know that you could be up to 500 meters off because they use a different system to datum their maps than we do. Also, kind of just be aware, these maps have layers to them. They're made up of tiles. They're called tiles. So they take the map and they flatten them down into little tiles. And you can see it when you try to load your map real quick when you zoom in and zoom out. Those tiles that are loading quickly, those are the different layers. Each layer has different symbology associated with them and is going to show you a different level of detail. So next time you're playing around with the Google map or the Waze map, just kind of be aware of that. Left there is an example of what those tiles that won't load look like. We've all seen that. And on the right is an example of streets that go to nowhere in China because they've been datumed incorrectly.
All right, so to conclude, the premise of this book, How to Lie with Maps, is basically the story of this book. There are a variety of ways that maps can lie, and often little white lies are necessary. Therefore, a wise map user is a skeptic because maps can send subtle and sometimes subliminal messages about what the author, sponsor, publisher wants to convey. Therefore, the skeptical map viewer assesses the cartographer's motive and recognizes the duality of the map they're using to include the function and underlying message that they're trying to convey. So therefore, healthy skepticism needs to be applied if you're ever going to use a map.
Thanks for playing, guys. We'll see you next time. We'll take questions via the chat.